Good morning and welcome to the Hope One show, everybody watching on our app, on our website, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And also, we are streaming live at the Freethinking Ministry Facebook page and YouTube channel. And that is because we have the great Tim Stratton today. Dr. Tim Stratton is going to be talking to us about hope through God's sovereignty. But before I bring Tim up, I want to let you know that I'm going to be hosting a couple of the shows this week, mainly because, again, Frank is out of the office. Frank had to go back to see his dad. His dad is doing a little better now, but he's still down there with him. And we want to ask you to please pray for Frank's dad. Help us with that. That'll be the best thing you can do. And also help us to share these streams. So make sure you hit the share button, make sure you hit the like button, and make sure you comment on the comment section and tag someone that you think it will be blessed by listening to this Hope One show. And without further ado, I want to bring in my friend Tim Stratton. He is a great philosopher, a great theologian, and he's going to be pretty much breaking it down when it comes to God's sovereignty and how we as Christians should have hope because we know that God have everything under his control. Here it is. Tim, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's up, Jorge? Thank you so much for having me on the show. Just really appreciate your friendship and also how you and Frank Turek have both sharpened me over the past several years. So thank you so much. I'm honored to be here today.
Bro, it's a joy to have you here. Me and you have enjoyed a long friendship. You've
Hmm.
been to our Cross Examining Structure Academy. And for all of those who might be thinking about joining this year's academy, is not canceled. We're going to Dallas in August. So make sure you go and fill out the application because we're filling up fast. And Tim is one of our graduates. And obviously, Tim is a man of many talents. But today we're going to focus on his view of God's sovereignty and our responsibility as human beings, what we would call free will. And in his words, it'll be libertarian free will. And he's going to explain a little bit of that. But right now, we're going through this pandemic. We're having a tough time right now through having to stay home. We're not producing or making as much money as we usually do. You told me, hey, some of your speaking engagements have been canceled. So tell me a little bit about this. But before that, tell us a little bit about your superhero origin story. How did you end up from being what were you a youth pastor to being
Right.
a well-known, well-rounded apologist?
Well, I was in youth ministry for probably, I don't know, I think from 98 till about 2000 and 2008. So I was comfortable for about 10 years until I realized that many of my students had really tough questions. And these questions, I was just saying, well, you just have to have more faith and just get in the Bible. But then they started saying, well, why should I have faith? Why should I think the Bible's true? And they were asking these deeper questions that I couldn't answer. And then they started bringing objections to Christianity and objections to thinking that the Bible is trustworthy and reliable. And these objections, and I would even say objections to the existence of God. And I was powerless to interact with these questions, at least rationally. I would just say, well, you just have to believe harder, or you have to have more faith, or something along those lines. And it just wasn't working. And I started seeing a lot of these young people in high school and college becoming atheists right in front of my face. And so I tried to start answering their questions. And I realized that most of the pastors, in fact, I would say at that time, I didn't know any pastor that could answer these questions and objections that were coming from high school students and college students, even some middle school students. And so, I started doing some research and I ran into people like Dr. William Lane Craig and Mike Lacona, some guy named Frank Turek. And I started realizing that these guys are dealing with these tough questions and that they're answering these tough questions. And so I started a journey of my own, kind of led by these guys. And it's utterly transformed my life and my ministry. So now I've devoted my life to answering tough questions.
Praise the Lord, man. You do a fantastic job. For everybody who wants to visit his site, if you don't know Freethinking Ministries, make sure you go to freethinkingministries.com. A lot of material is there, not only in English, but also in Spanish for all my Latino friends. Obviously, I'm always pumped up about that. Now, Tim, 2020 has been
Yeah.
hard for everyone. And I know you had some difficult things happen to you, not only this year, but also about the second half of last year, man. I mean, you had, I saw you pictures at the ER, pictures at the hospital. You look like white Nick Fury with a patch over your eye. I mean, tell me, man, what's been happening with you, and how can you, I don't know, man, still keep your head up, head above water, and have hope as a Christian, and as a thought leader in this apologetics world.
Well, yeah, 2020 has been tough for everybody. My 2019 was actually, I would say, the toughest year of my life.
Mm.
And so 2020, as tough as it's been, it's been a little easier than 2019 was. But there was also some great things in the midst of all that pain and suffering that I went through. I experienced moral evil. Um, I experienced natural evil, and sometimes it even seemed to be gratuitous evil, one might say. And sometimes I felt like, where is God in all of this? But I'd have to tell you that I've still got joy and peace and hope uh, through all of this. It's not always easy. It doesn't always come naturally. But you see, I know the truth. I know reality. I know why a sovereign, powerful, and perfectly loving God allows me and others to go all, to experience all kinds of pain and suffering. God allows me to go through all this pain, suffering, this affliction because of love. You see, I know there's a purpose behind this pain. My pastor, who's also on my board at Freethinking Ministries, he just did a sermon yesterday talking about this. It's the purpose behind our pain, and it's when you examine Scripture and you think about things philosophically, uh, everything starts to become more clear. You see, this purpose behind our pain, it's a loving purpose, and God's got my best in mind. Now, I know that might sound counterintuitive at first. I know it does. But after examining all the facts, I think one can reach this conclusion logically. So, like I said, it might not always be the first thought I have, but you see, we have the ability. God's given us the power to be able to take our thoughts captive before they take us. You consider 2 Corinthians 10:5. Paul tells us to take every thought captive to obey Christ. And when you understand who Christ is, the second person of the Trinity, and you realize that God is ultimate reality, uh, we are to take our thoughts captive to obey reality
Mm.
before they take us. Paul warns us in Colossians 2:8 that we can be taken captive by bad thinking. So you have the ability to take your thoughts captive before they take you. And so, yeah, I practice taking my thoughts captive every day. And when I do that, hope and peace, well, they come along for the ride.
Awesome, man. Well, this show is all about hope, so I want you to help us
Mhm.
out. What kind of thoughts do you take captive, and what do you replace them with? Because if you take something captive, you pull it away from where it is sitting, you have to replace it with something else. So tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
that's well said. The first kind of thoughts that often pass through our minds, I know the first kind of thoughts that might run my mind first thing in the morning, especially when I wake up in pain and suffering, things like that. Kind of thoughts that are God doesn't love me, or maybe even that God is evil, or perhaps that all of this evil, it's not compatible with the existence of God, and therefore I might reason, well, therefore, since I'm experiencing all this evil and pain and suffering, that God doesn't exist. In fact, you know full well that so many of the atheists that we interact with, when you ask them, well, why are you an atheist, they say it's because of the problem of evil. They don't think that God, a perfectly loving and all-powerful God, is compatible with all the pain, evil, and suffering that we experience. Um, but I'll tell you right now, they're not taking their thoughts captive. Now, let me back up. I'll say that all of those kinds of thoughts that even I might experience first thing in the morning, they might run through my mind, but really the front lines of the spiritual battle that we're in, it's really regarding how we think. That's the primary focus of this spiritual battle. It's the battle of the mind. I think even when you think about the great passage in Ephesians 6, I love Ephesians 6:13. It says, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you can stand your ground. And really, that spiritual armor, that spiritual body armor that we read about, it's really about knowing truth and living according to the truth. I mean, when you know the truth moment by moment and you live accordingly, you've got your helmet on, you've got the belt of truth on. I mean, you're moving forward, knowing truth. You're able to take your thoughts captive. You know, as someone once said, your mind is a battlefield. Mm-hmm. Be its commander, not its soldier. Mm. So it's a battle for the mind. Will you be in self-control, as the Bible talks about? Are you in control of your mind, or are you letting something or somebody else be in control of your mind? So with all that said, I like to take those initial false thoughts captive and replace them with this truth. God has really good reasons to allow all kinds of pain and suffering.
Mm. Well, I hear that, and I know it's for many hard to process. So here's the $1,000,000 question. Why does God allow all kinds of evil and bad stuff happen all of the time, Tim?
That's a great question. That is a great $1,000,000 question, as you said. And, you know, I think we can kind of keep it simple and answer it in 4 easy steps. So step 1, here's the first step. We first need to recognize exactly why humanity exists. Why do you exist? That is to say, what is the objective purpose of life? So it stands to reason that if God created humanity on purpose and for a specific purpose, then there would be objective facts about humanity, irrespective of the subjective opinions from humanity. So if that's the case, not only does that ground objective morality, but it gives us objective purpose. So if it's the case that God created humanity on purpose and for a specific purpose, then there are objective facts about humanity, irrespective of our subjective opinions, irrespective of what humans think. So no matter what you think, there's some truths about you.
Right.
So that grounds objective purpose, and it gives us objective morality at the same time.
Okay, so, well, that sounds beautiful. It sounds great. I know many of our viewers, especially on YouTube, are skeptics, and they would ask maybe, how would we know such a thing? How would we discover the objective purpose of life, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, I've heard even atheists say things like, well, how would we know? Well, that's a good question. And it seems that we would need some kind of divine revelation, if that's the case. If God created humanity on purpose and for a specific purpose, well, how would we know that purpose? Well, he'd have to tell us. He'd have to let us know those kinds of things. And if Christianity is true, and we have good reasons to think Christianity is true, but if Christianity is true, well, then we've got that. God has revealed this to us. That is to say, the creator of the universe entered into the universe to tell the people within the universe exactly why they exist and exactly how to fulfill the objective purpose of our existence. So, this is kind of a hybrid or a combination of what theologians and philosophers talk about. You'll hear a lot of people, even William Lane Craig, talk about divine command theory. You'll hear people talk about purpose theory. And I kind of have a hybrid of the two. I believe that purpose theory is what logically grounds objective purpose and morality. And God's commands then put us in an epistemic position to know ontological and objective reality. So maybe I'm getting too deep into some deep philosophical waters now. But you think that makes sense?
Yeah, man. Shoot. Continue.
All right. Well, so getting back to Christianity, Jesus made objective reality clear. And he put us in an epistemic position so that we can know how we ought to live. He summarized the entire law into two simple and easy to remember commands. I like to summarize it like this. Number one, hey, everybody, love God first.
Mm-hmm.
He loves you, love him back. That's number one. Number two, everybody love everybody. From your neighbors to your enemies and everybody in between. It's all about love. That's why you exist. That's why God created you. So love God first. Love each person of the Trinity and each person the Trinity created. It's all about love. So that's the first step in answering your $1 million question. The objective purpose of life, the reason you exist, it's all about love.
Okay. So step one, we're closer to the truth now. So we got step one. And that's pretty clear. I think everybody knows, command 1A and 1B, those that you just mentioned. I think you said it beautifully, love God as a whole, every one of the persons of the Trinity and every person that God created. I think that was great way to say it. So now we at step one. What's a step two? And how many steps do we have to look forward to?
We got 4 steps total. So we got 3 left.
Okay, so give me the second one. Shoot.
Yeah. So the second step, the next step in answering the $1 million question is to realize what is required for a genuine true love relationship. So step one, we see it's all about love. Well, what is love? What I refer to as a maximal love relationship, or the best kind of love, or the kind of love worth wanting. So what's required for that? One key ingredient to the kind of love worth wanting is free will, and more specifically, what philosophers and theologians refer to as libertarian freedom. So that is to say, the best kind of love is only possible if we possess libertarian freedom, or also known as libertarian free will.
I see. Now let me well, we're getting now where we want to know. I got people, like I said, I got all these screens going on here, and I got people already asking, hey, when are you guys going to talk about the sovereignty of God? But I think this right here, what you just said about free will, human free will, and even if it's an intramural debate sometimes when we're talking about God's sovereignty and human free will, do we still have free will? Is the image of God have been, erased or effaced in the individuals? Do we still have any responsibility, or is everything predetermined or deterministic? Yada, yada, yada. We got all of these things going on. But I think this is a very important thing that we need to really master, and that is a definition of what it means to have freedom of the will, or what you will call libertarian freedom, coming from a theological and a philosophical standpoint. Give us that so we can actually go deep into God's sovereignty and how we can have hope through it. And for everybody who are watching, make sure leave your questions on the comment section. Type question, the word question in all caps. Make sure you leave a succinct question, and make sure that your grammar is good, because I have no time to be fixing your grammar as I'm reading your questions. So those questions are going to be dismissed. And again, we cannot get through all of the questions, but we're going to try to run through these and get Tim to answer some of your questions live here on the Hope One show. Tim, give us the definition of libertarian freedom.
You bet. All right. I maintain that an agent is free in a libertarian sense only if they possess the freedom to think or act otherwise. It seems, however, that if an agent is ever uncaused, right, and is simply the source of his or her thought or action, even if the agent cannot think or act otherwise for some weird reason, I don't know what that would be, but if the agent is ever not causally determined, then they are still free in a libertarian sense. So we call that the source. Now, So that's sourcehood libertarian freedom. So we can distinguish between two kinds of libertarian freedom. One is called the principle of alternative possibilities. We can abbreviate that and call it the PAP, the PAP, principle of alternative possibilities. It's often referred to as the ability to do otherwise. There's that version of libertarian freedom. So yeah, if you have an ability to do otherwise, then you've got libertarian freedom. But even if you don't have that for some weird reason, and you're simply the source of some of your thoughts or actions, that is to say that nothing or nobody else is causally determining all of your thoughts and all of your actions, then you still have libertarian freedom. Now, so you got two ways to understand it. I think both are true. I argue for both of them. But here's the deal. While the ability to do otherwise is sufficient for libertarian free will or libertarian freedom, I don't claim that it's always got to be necessary. I say that the source version of libertarian freedom is necessary. So be that as it may, I typically defend a specific definition of libertarian freedom. I think it entails both versions, and it goes like this. One has libertarian freedom if they have the ability to choose between or among a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with one's nature. So basically that means that something or someone else is not causing or determining all of my thoughts and actions, and also that I at least occasionally have the ability to choose between or among a range of alternative options, each compatible with my nature. I'm not arguing that you can choose something that's not compatible with your nature. I'm saying that sometimes our natures are such that we have a range from which to choose. So now the question might be asked, as Tina Turner once sang in the 80s, what's love got to do with this? I grew up in the 80s, so there you go. How does all of this free will talk and libertarian freedom apply to love? Well, think about it. If a woman with libertarian freedom could resist the flirtatious advances of a man or not, right? Note the range of options to resist flirtatious advances or not to resist them, right? If she chooses not to resist a man's advances, it could lead to a true love relationship, right? So she doesn't have to initially say yes to the man's marriage proposal, right? All she has to do is not resist his flirtatious advances. However, you really want to get my blood boiling. You can talk about when evil men drop drugs into a woman's drink or something like that. So if a man slipped a drug into a woman's drink so that she loses the freedom to resist or not to resist, then it's obvious that this is not a maximal kind of love. This is similar, from a few years ago, a movie called Suicide Squad came out, and what the Joker, Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker did to Harley Quinn in the movie. Harley Quinn was resisting. She wanted nothing to do with the Joker, but then the Joker changed her nature by brainwashing her. So now she'll tell everybody that she loves the Joker. She only wants to be with, she just says, I love Mr. J. I want to be with Mr. J. She'll have sex with Mr. J whenever he wants. That's not love, that's rape, right? It's clearly not love. It's the epitome of evil. Against her will, he changed her nature so that she'll blindly follow him wherever he goes. That's not love. Anyway, I digress. I'll say it like this. Since God created humanity on purpose and for the specific purpose of love, God also creates humanity with libertarian freedom so that the kind of love worth wanting, the maximal kind of love, can be attained. So that's the second step. First step is you were created for love. The second step is realizing what makes love possible. That's libertarian freedom.
Yeah, that's essential. And that was, it was great. I'm glad that you use real life examples to explain this, because this is deep. You can go really into the philosophical side of things. And for everybody who are watching, make sure that you timestamp this explanation and then later on go back and rewatch it, because I know this is going to be very beneficial for all of you watching. Now, Tim, you said step one, step two, now step 3. Let's go ahead on. We got this one and one more, and
Yeah.
then we'll be able to wrap this up and see how we can have hope through God's sovereignty. Now we know that free will is essential in this whole discussion, and love, being, I would say, the highest virtue, is also one of the pillars of all of this. So give us a step 3.
Well, the next step in answering the $1,000,000 question is to point out the fact that true love, or a maximal love, never fails. Right? We see this in 1 Corinthians 13:8. Uh, love never fails. So, I mean, with that in mind, I think that most people don't really know what love is. Just consider the divorce rate. You look at all these people who got married and on their wedding day uh, expressed their love for each other, but then they got divorced. So maybe one person still loves the other one and that love hasn't failed, but obviously at least one side of the relationship, the love the love failed. But according to scripture, love never fails. So if that was the case, it was not true love in the first place. They were confused. A true love relationship will never end. So when you see people say, well, I used to love this person and now I don't, you don't know what love is, at least not biblically speaking. Love never comes to an end. It never fails. So I'll tell you what God desires. God desires an eternal, without end, love relationship with each and every person into the infinite future. I mean, I could go all through scripture, Old Testament and New Testament. Let me give you a couple of my favorites from the New. In fact, in my doctoral dissertation, which is soon to be published, I discuss this. Many of these passages, but I'll just give you a couple right now. 1 Timothy 2:4 is clear. Paul tells Timothy that God desires all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So get that, all people to be saved and know the truth. Now, when you think about it, what is salvation? And at its essence, salvation is a true love relationship with your Creator for eternity. That's what salvation is. Uh, there's nobody in heaven that doesn't love Jesus, and there's nobody in hell that loves Jesus. Think about it that way. If you are in a true love relationship with God, guess what? You are saved, because love never fails. So that you get the perseverance of the saints along with it too. True love never fails. So salvation at its core is a true love relationship with God, with your Creator. So, and God desires all people to be saved. God desires all people to have a true love relationship with Him. 2 Peter 3:9 also reiterates this. It says, the Lord is patient, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance, that all should get right with God, is what it's saying, and have a true love relationship with God. God doesn't just want this for a few years or for a few decades. He wants this for eternity, a true love, eternal relationship. As Buzz Lightyear might say, to infinity and beyond. I mean, that's the kind of love that God wants with you, with each and every person. So in order to attain this love worth wanting, God gives libertarian freedom to all humans into eternity so that we can experience infinite love with no end. So not only do I believe that we have libertarian free will in this state of affairs on earth, I also believe we have it in heaven for eternity. So yeah, step one, the reason why you were created is because of love. And the second step is libertarian freedom is essential in order to have the best kind of love.
Mm-hmm.
And God gives us this freedom into eternity. So that's where we're at so far, if you're tracking with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it'll be nice if you can maybe give us a summary of this, and maybe we can even create, I don't know, a downloadable PDF or something for the people that are watching. It'll be great resource for our audience. We can pin it in the comments section, whether it's on YouTube, on Facebook, and everybody who are watching on the Freethinking Ministry pages. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for, I know we didn't announce it. I mean, and Tim posted the announcement less than 24 hours ago. I think that you shared it on your pages, but it is great to see that people are watching from all different platforms. So Now we're at the final step that helps us to have peace and hope during hard times, and to see how our freedom plays a part in all of this, and also how God is sovereign over all. So, Tim, give us the last step.
All right. The final step. So, with love and eternity in mind, got to make sure we don't forget our foundation so far.
Mm.
With love and mind, this same ability that allows us to experience true and maximal love is also the same ability when used in a backwards manner that allows us to resist God's love and God's grace and his commands. Right? So think about that. That same love, or that same ability that God gives us to be able to experience this maximal love relationship is also the same ability that allows us to resist God. And this is easy to remember because love spelled backwards is evil, right? Lovevol. All right. All right. I'm
That's
not
it.
a speller, but you get the point and you'll never forget it. All right. So remember, God gives us an ability to love, and that's
Uh-huh.
libertarian freedom. And that same ability that allows us to love when used in a backwards manner allows us to do evil. And that's easy to remember because love spelled backwards is evil. So
Evil.
that's
Okay,
a good way to remember it.
okay, okay. So one of the things that you said that I think is step three is that he wants us to have, for us to be in this relationship, in this love relationship forever, this freely given love relationship for eternity. You mentioned the word heaven.
Yeah.
Many people say, hey, if we are not, or if we're unable to sin in heaven, how in the world can we have free will? If doesn't that mean that we will sin in heaven if we have free will? Or if we cannot sin in heaven, then that means that we don't have free will. So this is
Yeah.
super simple question for you, Tim. So go ahead on and answer that for us.
That's exactly right. I hear it all the time that, hey, if we're going to have free will in heaven, doesn't that mean we're going to sin in heaven? No, it doesn't mean that, at least not necessarily. You see, it's important to remember some important words here, some modes, if you will. You can sin in heaven, but you never will sin in heaven.
Mm,
Uh,
mm.
we
And
might
but
distinguish the
how is that? How, I mean, you make the distinction in the word and it sounds really good, but how can you reach that conclusion from just looking at that statement?
Yeah. Well, like I said, just because you can sin in heaven, it doesn't mean that you will sin in heaven. Just because you could sin in heaven, it doesn't mean you would sin in heaven. And I
Hmm.
think, as our friend Greg Kokel likes to ask, well, how'd you reach that conclusion? Well, I think multiple places in Scripture allude to this, but I love going to what Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:17. And he says that these light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. All right, so I mean, focus on the word eternal there, let alone afflictions. I mean, by the way, Paul's being a little sarcastic here because he provides an entire list of all the sufferings that he's been through. And I challenge people to compare their sufferings to Paul's. And, I think most of the time, Paul might have us beat. But Paul knew what it meant to suffer. In fact, he was killed for his faith. So if you have the opportunity to compare your list of sufferings to Paul's, you haven't at least gone through all of his sufferings. But um, Paul's basically telling us that all of this bad stuff, all kinds of bad stuff, whatever you can think of, add it to the list. Whatever bad stuff you can think of, or whatever bad kind of stuff that you're experiencing or you're aware of somebody else experiencing, all of that bad stuff is preparing us for eternity.
Hmm.
So we've got to keep eternity in mind. And if we don't have eternity in mind, nothing's going to make sense. But you see, I mean, I think Paul answered this $1 million question a couple thousand years ago.
Wow, that's good, man. So We look at what's happening right now with the COVID. We look at what's happening right now with businesses. We look at even us as Christians that we cannot even congregate as we were
Yeah.
been doing it for 2 millennia almost, right?
Yeah.
And uh, we look at the affliction, we look at the bad stuff, we look at the pain, the suffering, and how is this preparing us for eternity? Because that's what you're saying. You're saying that all of this stuff is preparing us for eternity.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, because we learn over time. We learn. Humans have the ability to learn just how stupid it is not to obey God's commands. We learn how stupid it is not to follow the commands of Jesus all the time. We learn how stupid it is to resist God. We learn how stupid it is not to always love God and all people all the time. We learn to always trust God, and not trusting God is really the epitome of stupidity. Sorry, some people don't like the word stupidity, but I think we resonate with that word. Uh, Perhaps it's fair to say that if you're stupid, you're not willing to learn. Are you willing to learn just how crazy it is not to follow the commands of Jesus all the time? Are you willing to learn how crazy it is not to follow the law of Christ into
Mm,
eternity? I mean, we learn. How do we learn? We learn from affliction that Paul's talking about there. That's why it prepares us for eternity. We learn from affliction and all of this bad stuff so that one day, someday, after you wake up in a perfect state of affairs in the presence of God and all evil and suffering, it's finally come to an end. Will you take that perfect state of affairs for granted? I mean, think about it. Adam, Eve, Satan, third of all the angels, they were created in a perfect state of affairs. They took it for granted and they wrecked it. But after experiencing this world filled with all this pain, evil, and suffering, whether it be moral evil, natural evil, anything you can think of that you don't like, if you wake up in a perfect state of affairs tomorrow and all that's gone, will you take that perfect state of affairs for granted and being in the presence of God for granted?
mm,
I won't. I, for one, will not take that state of affairs for granted. Maybe it's because I've lived long enough now, being in my mid 40s, and like you said, I've experienced a lot of pain, even recently. Man, I can't wait to exist in a state of affairs and where that's over. You see, this is how God can guarantee the perseverance of the saints for eternity without ever violating human freedom and true love. You see, I talk about the perseverance of the saints. Uh, you know, I'm not a Calvinist, but I affirm the P of tulip, the perseverance of the saints.
mhm.
I think this is how God can guarantee the perseverance of the saints. So, without violating human freedom. So, to answer the $1 million question, why does God allow all kinds of bad stuff? Well, it's because of love.
Mm,
I know that sounds crazy at first, it's counterintuitive, but
mhm,
after examining all the data, it's a logical response.
mm. So, well, this is a lot to take in for many of us. We usually run from these sort of conversations and discussions because they just take so much out of us to think about this. But we are called to come into reason with God and to learn deeply about the record that He gave us, what we call the Scriptures. Now, after thinking about these 4 steps and how they give you hope and peace, how do you think that they allow you to hold to this peace that surpass all understanding, man?
Yeah, the peace that passes understanding. I kind of joke around and I say, well, I think the Holy Spirit allows Christians to have this peace that passes understanding. But I feel like I'm to the point now where I actually understand it. It's not just a feeling or a warranted knowledge that I have without being able to connect the dots. I can now connect the dots. And that helps. It's added to the inner witness of the Holy Spirit, if you will. It strengthened my faith um, because I understand this, why I should have this peace right now. I know that I'm being prepared for eternity, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4:17. Think about it. Paul's really the first one to say no pain, no gain. That's what it is. It's no pain, no gain. The gain that Paul's talking about here is heaven, an eternal love relationship in perfect paradise into eternity, into the infinite future with no end. So just like when I go to the gym and I work out, I experience pain, but that pain has at least some temporary benefits. But think about what Paul told Timothy here. He says in 1 Timothy 4:8, that for physical training is of some value, he said. I guess Paul hit the gym occasionally. But he says physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding a promise for both the present life and the here and now and the life to come, heaven, right? The perfect paradise. So you see, pain often leads to the godliness that Paul is discussing here in 1 Timothy 4:8. I was a pastor, like I said, for years, and I lost count of how many people I baptized. But whenever I do a baptism, I would always ask the person who I'm about to dunk in the water for a testimony. I wanted to hear myself, and I wanted everybody watching to hear also. I wanted to hear from them, what was it that brought you to Christ and ultimately brought you here today wanting to be baptized? And I'll tell you this, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that probably around 99% of the time, what brought people to Christ was the pain and suffering that they were experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
They realized that they couldn't do life on their own anymore, whether they were betrayed by a loved one, whether they were experiencing natural evil, whether through sickness or disease or tornadoes or hurricanes, whatever, wherever it was, they were experiencing evil, even if it was just the awareness of other evil in the world, even the idea of evil that they might not be witnessing or empirically observing themselves, just knowing that other stuff could be happening that's bad that they don't like and probably is happening that they don't like. Sometimes I'll say, even if it was one little girl I was talking to, very young, and when I asked her one of the reasons why she was a Christian, she started talking about this evil and suffering, and she was talking about the very idea of animals that she's never seen suffering in jungles. I mean, she didn't even observe it directly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. But you see, all the suffering we experience or that we're aware of in the world, or that we know even probably is going on, all the suffering we experience in this world, whether it be caused by moral evil, natural evil, seemingly gratuitous evil, even when it seems like God is hidden, right? It's all preparing libertarian free creatures, is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as Paul says, is preparing us to properly enjoy and never take it for granted. Unlike Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels did, we have a blessing that they didn't have. What's our blessing? Suffering. All kinds of pain, evil, and suffering. Right? They didn't have it, and they wrecked it.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
have it. Why would you wreck it if you
Right.
find yourself in it tomorrow, in a
Right.
perfect state of affairs tomorrow? Right? It's preparing us to properly enjoy pain, evil, and suffering. Affliction is preparing us to properly enjoy and never take it for granted a perfect state of affairs where there is no moral evil, no natural evil, no gratuitous evil. A state where God is always in your face. He's never hidden. We will enjoy that. We won't wreck it. We realize that this is how it ought to be. So you see, when we keep eternity in mind, along with libertarian freedom and love, well, this picture starts to get into focus. It becomes clear, and things start to make sense. They're clarified. So I'll tell you what, this brings me so much comfort when I'm experiencing any and all kinds of pain. There is purpose. You see, a sovereign God has purpose behind our pain. A sovereign God has purpose behind our pain. This purposeful pain has eternal benefits for
Mm.
you. So here's the bottom line. We think about uh, this sovereign God. Well, consider the words of Jesus in John 16:33. In this world, you will have trouble, but take
Mm.
heart. I have overcome the world.
Well,
Talk about a sovereign God. And also, don't forget the words of Paul in Romans 8:28. He says that God, our sovereign God, works for the good of those who love him. We've talked about love,
love,
the
yeah.
true love relationship. That's into the eternal future. So God works for the good of those who love him. He's got
Hmm.
eternity in mind. And finally, uh, Isaiah 26:3 says, you keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. It's been summarized like this: the Lord gives perfect peace to those whose faith is firm. And you see, my faith in a sovereign God is so firm right now that even though I went through the worst year of my life in 2019, and this 2020 is pretty hard also,
Right.
I've got my faith is firm. I've got the inner witness of the Holy Spirit, but I'm also able to connect all these theological dots logically,
Mm.
and that has really strengthened my faith, even when times are tough.
Amen to that, man. Excellent, excellent way to wrap it up. Now, we owe our audience some Q&A time. So we
All right.
moved all the way to 48 minutes into the show. So we're going to extend it 10 more minutes so we can answer people's questions. And I got our first question. Sam asked, are we wrong in saying this is all part of God's plan to someone who is grieving? And he says, friends of mine are going back and forth on this recently. Should we say, hey, all of this is part of God's plan to someone who is actually grieving? So you, as a pastor and as a philosopher and theologian, how would you answer that?
Well, I think you can answer yes to that. Say that, but I think we owe them a little more, and that's why I offered a four-step explanation. I don't think it does much to say, well, that's just God's plan. See you later. I think you need to explain exactly what this does for us. Why is it good that we exist in a world where there is so much that we don't like about it? Well, it's because it points us to the way things ought to be. Whenever you say, I don't like something in this world, or you call that evil or whatever you want to call it, what you're assuming is heaven, right? Heaven is where this doesn't happen. Yeah, right. Heaven, there won't be a loved one who dies. Heaven, there won't be a friend who betrays you. Heaven, there won't be natural evil. Um, so whenever you say this is evil or this isn't good or I don't like this, what you're saying is, what you have in mind anyway, is you are assuming heaven, the way things ought to be, where you're in the very presence of God, where God, if there was a tsunami coming your way, he would stop it, right? He wouldn't be hidden. Where, I mean, where we all have learned to love him. Now, so I say, yeah, you're assuming heaven. God's plan is preparing us not to reject heaven like Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels did. So you're not wrong in saying this is God's plan, but you better add the rest of the story and share these details.
Yeah, absolutely. Great
And
answer, man.
very quickly, let me say that I do this on a regular basis. In fact, I did a funeral not long ago for a woman who died at a young age. She had two little girls
Mm.
and a grieving husband. And the congregation and the entire family, all of her relatives, they wanted these kinds of answers. And they wanted me to talk about it at the funeral,
Mm.
philosophical issues like this. And it helped them.
Good. Good. Yeah. I mean, you do a fantastic job with that. Now I have a Megan O'Brien, and I think this is related to some of the stuff that you've been explaining here. It says, if we can sin in heaven but won't, how does that differ from the Garden of Eden? Where did where we can sin and did. And you touch on this and you sort of brush it over because you were moving to a different point, but I know you touch on it and you pretty much gave a mini explanation of this. I want you to expand on that, Tim.
Yeah. So uh, the difference between you and I and Megan and Adam and Eve is that Adam and Eve were created in a perfect state of affairs where there's no pain, evil, or suffering. They're not experiencing any kind of affliction by any means there. Um, and so they're created in a suffering free state of affairs. But they obviously took it for granted and they wrecked it because of that. I say Satan and a third of all, Satan and the angels were there too, and Satan and a third of all the angels took it for granted and wrecked it. So you and I, like I said, we have the blessing of being created in a state of affairs in which we do suffer, sometimes for decades. But when you keep eternity in mind, suppose you lived for 100 years, and every day was horrible. Imagine the worst possible life a person could exist in. I think of The Princess Bride, one of the greatest movies of all time. And one of the scenes there is Wesley was in the pit of despair. And so imagine being born in the pit of despair, and their goal is to keep you alive for 100 years, to torture you every day, making each day worse than the other, the day before it. And so just a horrible life. But as we see, all this pain and suffering points us to Christ, as I talked about. And so you become a Christian, you become a Christ follower in the pit of despair, and then you die after 100 years of torture and affliction. When does it become worth it going through all that pain, evil, and suffering in the pit of despair? Is it one day in perfection? Some people might say, hey, I'll take it. Is it 50 years compared to that 100 years? Some people might say, hey, I'd make that trade. Well, what about 100 years? 100 years on both sides, 100 years of being in the pit of despair, 100 years of being in perfect paradise. Some people might take that. Maybe you say, no, I need a lot more. What if I said, okay, you get 1,000 years of perfect paradise if you go through 100 years of the pit of despair? What about 1,000,000 years? What about 1,000,000,000,000 years? Oh, but wait, there's more. What about the infinite future with no end? Hey, I'll tell you what, sign me up. If it takes the pit of despair to lead me to Christ, I'm not going to take a perfect state of affairs for granted. It will become, eternity will engulf, the tsunami of eternity will engulf the few decades of suffering that we have on this planet. It will be almost as if it never happened.
Mm.
But we will always remember that it did
Wow.
happen. Because we have that, we won't take perfect paradise, love with God and others for granted. We won't wreck it. And that's what separates us from Adam and Eve, Satan and a third of all the angels. They didn't have the gift of suffering. We do.
Awesome, man. It's definitely going to have to be a clip for our Cross Examine channel and for the Free Thinking Ministries YouTube channel that you need to go and subscribe and click the bell if you're watching there. So make
That's
sure
right.
you make your way to the Free Thinking Ministries YouTube channel. You can go to freethinkingministries.com and then you can find a link there for that. Now, Burgundy Hughes said, and I think this question is also has a pastoral aspect to it, and it's close to me because it deals with drug addiction, alcoholism, and that sort of thing. And Burgundy says, you say, well, love all, yeah, but what about the toxic people? I love people, but some are dangerous to be around for my sobriety. And me
Mm.
coming from a background of drug use, alcoholism, and the like, I completely understand because the first thing that I did was to completely isolate myself from even my closest friends that I knew that were still doing this. And in my view, they were good friends, but they were not good for that. So what about loving everybody, but maybe staying away from some? Is that, I mean, how do I do this?
Well, the ultimate, if we're going to, what is true love? Ultimately, a true is a desire for the eternal flourishing of the other. So there, I told you I experienced some moral evil, not just last year, but throughout my life. Some other people have done things to people I love. Um, I don't want them close to me or my family. In fact, there are some people, they better not get close to my family. With that said, I've wrestled with this. I've asked God to help me. I believe I have a love in my heart for even the people I don't trust right now and the people I don't want close to my family. Um, that doesn't mean I hate them. I want the best for them. In fact, I can think of one person who, uh, has really done wrong to some people in my family. I have prayed with that person over the phone. I've sent them books, Christian books to consider. I've tried to help them grow in love with Christ. I want them to know Jesus. I want them to be utterly transformed. So when we're in heaven together, we will commune together. They won't be toxic anymore if they're in heaven, right? They will have learned, right? This whole thing I'm talking about is we learn, we're transformed. So by the time we're in heaven, in the presence of God, we will have learned how not to be toxic, and we will enjoy each other. So that might be hard to think about right now. I mean, it was hard for me to wrestle with. There's some people on this planet right now, I don't want to see them. That doesn't mean, and I definitely don't want them close to my family. That doesn't mean I don't love them. I love them. I have a desire for their eternal flourishing, and I will do what it takes to help them get there. They just better not do it close to my family,
I
if that
see.
makes
That's
sense.
absolutely, man. That is great. That's another awesome clip right there, man. You in a roll. Now, we have about 5 more minutes before I ask you the final question. And since this is the Hope One show, is going to be related to that, and you've been giving us a lot of great material today. Gustavo Carrillo is a good friend of mine, and he asked because he's also an apologist. He says, as an apologist, what do you consider to be the most difficult argument to engage in, and why?
Uh, I suppose the problem of evil, and whether I think it's easy to answer though when you're talking about moral evil, um, and it's easily answered with the free will defense. But when you get into the problem of natural evil, it's not so easy to connect those dots to free will, but I've done it. In fact, that's part of what I do in my doctoral dissertation. I was recently in a debate with a fellow Christian, going back and forth on YouTube, and he said, "Well, yeah, you can answer the problem of moral evil with free will, but you can't do it when it comes to natural evil." And well, I've
Hmm.
just done it basically with what I've given you today. How God is preparing
Yeah.
libertarian free creatures into eternity. So it is connected to libertarian freedom, and we can make that case. And I go into much more depth and detail in my dissertation. It's about to be published by Whiffenstock publishers, so stay tuned for that. It should be out in the next year, and I will make that case. Um, and and then recently I co-authored a article with Euquibus Erasmus, where we deal with the problem of divine hiddenness.
Hmm.
And now I'll just tell you this. I'm a Molinist. That means I affirm two things: that humans have libertarian free will and God has middle knowledge of our free choices before creating us. Um, and I think if you hold that position, you can answer the problem of moral evil, natural evil, even divine hiddenness. Um, and so, from a Molinist position, I don't think they're that complicated or hard to answer. Uh, but I think usually those would be considered the toughest questions. And I think that's why most atheists today in academia, scholarly atheists, they're trying to prove, you think about the ontological argument, which seeks to demonstrate the existence of a maximally great being. The problem of evil, whether it be moral, natural, hiddenness, whatever, they're trying to debunk the idea that a maximally great being exists.
Exists. Yeah.
So it's the greatest argument against the greatest being is your problems of evil. I think the Molinist has access to answer each and every one of those objections, where other Christians might not have the same logical access. But I'm willing to be wrong on that. but I do make a case for it in my soon to be published book. So I encourage people to get that book, read it, and let me know what you think.
Absolutely, because I know you're gonna send me a signed copy, and then I get you back into the Cross Examine live show, right? And
That's right.
actually, I wanted the sport because I got my man Boba Fett is the way, right? This is the
Yeah,
way.
that's
So, but I wanted to wear some Freethinking Ministries gear, and I have an outdated hat. The logo is
uh,
not even that hat anymore. So,
yeah.
I just wait for my care package in the mail, with the logo and with the hat, with the shirt, and with the sign book, and then we get you the Cross Examine live show again, and we
All
do
right.
this all over again. Now I have two more questions plus
Okay.
mine. So shoot from the hip. This is gonna be easy for you. What is the definition that you espouse in terms of the sovereignty of God? What does sovereignty means when you use that word in your arguments, in your write-ins, and when you speak in?
Yeah. So I affirm that God, in some form or fashion, is in control of everything. But how I that might sound like it's a contradiction when I'm saying that humans possess libertarian freedom. Well, the Molinist, like I said, has a way to demonstrate how you can be free in a libertarian sense. There's no causal determinism going on. There's no strings attached. How you can have that, and how God can create a world in which He knows how we will freely choose.
Mm-hmm.
And so He can be sovereign and in control without controlling, if you will. So that's how you get sovereignty. God is in control. I can say that and still affirm my libertarian freedom and yours as well. Where, uh, again, I don't think any other Christian, or I should say, anybody that's a Christian who's not a Molinist, I don't think has access to such phrases. So again, that's part of what I write about in my book.
Right, absolutely. Now that last one is comes from the unapologetic apologist, and is on on our YouTube channel, and is related to this whole Molinist deal. How significant would you say it is for the average Christian to understand this concept of Molinism in relationship to God's sovereign? Is tied to what you just said. So just go ahead on and top it off with this one, and then I'll ask my last question,
Okay.
and then we can finish the Hope One show.
Yeah, I think it's vital for even the average Christian sitting in the pews to start to understand these concepts. Um, and really, it's because when we understand how God is sovereign, that He has predestined all things without causally determining all things. Those are two different things that we should
Mm-hmm.
not conflate or equate. That it's a false conflation when we confuse predestination and causal determinism. God can
Mm-hmm.
predestine all things without causally determining all things. That leaves you free and responsible for your choices and how you think, at least occasionally. So, like I said, I've done many funerals where I share these topics. In fact, I did two funerals for the same family who both had toddlers who passed away. So sad. But it was things related to what I was saying here. And I was able to tie in middle knowledge to what God even knew about their young ones, and provide hope. It's probably too deep to get into this right now. We don't have enough time. But I've seen how these, what people would normally say are deep theological or philosophical concepts, how we can simplify them enough and give them to the people in the pews and give people hope, and also realize that they're responsible for
Right.
some of their thoughts and actions. So I think it's some vital truths to convey to the Christian masses, which I think the majority of Christians have missed over the the last few centuries.
Right.
So there you go.
This is great, man. Now, my last question, and before I ask this, I got my boy Jairo Izquierdo. He's part of our cross-examine team, and
Yeah.
he's got a great question for you, but it's a bit too technical, and I want to let him know live that I'm gonna be putting both of you in touch so you can answer it for him. So he's getting the Stratton treat. okay, here on his question, but he's not gonna get it live, and he's probably gonna hate me for that because I didn't ask it live. But anyways, let's go ahead on with the last question. How can uh, we as Christians have hope through God's sovereignty? Leave us with that last nugget of wisdom in terms of how we can continue to push through this pandemic and be hopeful that God is in control of everything.
Ultimately, God created a world in which He knew that uh, those who love Him will persevere for eternity if we experience a world full of all kinds of pain, evil, and suffering.
Mm.
So when I go through pain, evil, and suffering, when I go through affliction, even though I hate it, I got to tell you this, I try to avoid pain and suffering and
Yeah.
affliction. I guess I like to go to the gym and experience a little self inflicted pain, but I do know the immediate benefits of that. But when I go through uh, suffering and affliction here, and I can't always see the immediate benefit, I know the eternal benefit because Paul made it clear in 2 Corinthians 4:17. These momentary afflictions, these light momentary afflictions, prepare us for eternity. It prepares us for heaven, a true love relationship into the infinite future where pain and suffering will only be a memory. And so that helps me. And I've seen it help a lot of other people too. Just that knowledge, knowing uh, that what Paul described in 2 Corinthians 4:17 is true. We are being prepared for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison.
Wow, praise the Lord, man. Thank you so much for being on the show today, team. Thank you for those last couple of words, man. Thank you for your research, your academic work, your excellent online ministry. Again, make sure that you follow the Freethinking Ministries, like his page on Facebook, and follow his channel on and subscribe on YouTube. He puts out great content. Tim, thank you for being here. Thanks everybody who are watching on our website, on our app, both of our Facebook pages, in Tim's pages, and also on our YouTube channel. And tomorrow we're gonna have the great Abdul Murray, okay, here on the Hope One show. And Frank is gonna be back all the way from Florida, and he's gonna be hosting the show tomorrow for this special edition with Abdul Mari. But with that being said, thanks everybody for tuning in, the hundreds of people that tune in and hang out with us today. We'll see you tomorrow on the Hope One show. And on Wednesday, we're going to have Mike Winger talking about not only the Book of Mormon, but also the Passion Translation and how we can have hope through the truth of the scriptures and not some sort of adulterated translation. Thank you, team. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you tomorrow on the Hope One show.